So, hello everyone. Welcome to one of the first fall panels. We are talking today about romance books, which I don't know if everyone is in my boat, but romance books saved my 2020 for me. That was just, what I needed to read last year and also this year. So, I'm happy to be joining some of my favorite romance book authors, and I'm really happy that we're doing this panel. Just some general housekeeping rules first. We do not tolerate any harassment of any kind. And so if that happens, you'll get blocked and it will be your own fault. So anyway, I will let everyone introduce themselves and then we can talk about romance on Halloween.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Roselle Lim. I wrote Natalie Tan's Book of Luck and Fortune as my debut, and my second book that came out last year was Vanessa Yu's Magical Paris Tea Shop. My upcoming book coming out next August is Sophie Goes Lonely Hearts Club, and it's about a matchmaker who has to match 7 old, grumpy Chinese bachelors to save her reputation so she can get clients, and it's set in Toronto.
I'm Suzanne Park. I'm a YA and adult rom-com contemporary writer. And I had 2 books come out last year, one at the very beginning of the pandemic, and then one last summer. And then this year I also had 2 releases. I don't know which way I'm pointing. This one, Sunny Song Will Never Be Famous. That's a YA that came out this summer, and that's about a Korean American teenager who has a viral video mishap, and she's sent to digital detox camp on a farm in Iowa. And so we meet again. Yes, correct. That one. That also came out this past summer, and that's about an investment banker, an overworked investment banker named Jessie Kim, and she is let go on Zoom, and she has to figure out what she wants to do with her life. So she moves back home to Tennessee, lives in her childhood bedroom, and has to figure out how to restart her life. And while she's there, she runs into her childhood middle school rival, Daniel Choi, and some fun ensues.
Hi, I'm Lillie Vale, and I am the author of The Shoddy Setup, which came out just last month. It was my debut adult rom-com, and it's about a woman called Rita Chitness, who is a furniture designer and interior decorator, whose mom ropes her into working with her ex-boyfriend from 6 years ago, who pretty spectacularly broke her heart. And they're forced to work together on this kind of rundown house. And this was born out of my love for HGTV at the beginning of the pandemic. This was my pandemic book baby, which kind of got me through the whole thing. And the conflict comes from the fact that while they're working together in very close forced proximity, they actually also match on a matrimonial dating website where she has assigned herself and her current boyfriend up to prove to everyone else that they are the perfect match, and she is completely over her ex, which, spoiler alert, she's not. And on my next adult rom-com called The Decoy Girlfriend is about an author who is caught impersonating her celebrity lookalike, and she gets busted and she gets forced into temporarily maintaining her cover while the really hunky co-star. And I also have a YA coming out next year, my second young adult novel called Beauty and the Beast, which is a gender-swapped Beauty and the Beast retelling, which is a rivals to lovers, and it's also forced proximity and a workplace romance.
Hi, I am Lynn Solomon, and I am the author of several YA novels, most of them romantic comedies, and then my debut adult rom-com, The X-Talk, came out earlier this year. That seems like it was forever ago, but I guess that happened. And it is about rivals at a public radio station who pretend to be exes to host a new show to save their station. And then my next book, which was my first completely edited or written, edited, revised pandemic book is Weather Girl, and this comes out on January 11th. And it is sort of like Set It Up or The Parent Trap at a TV station. It's about a meteorologist and a sports reporter who team up to try to reunite their divorced bosses at their TV station, and in the process end up falling for each other.
I am so happy right now. Yeah, I've read all the books because that's what I do, and they're just all so great. Character dynamics, everything is just so swoony, and yeah, as I said, romance books clearly were the key to my survival in 2020 and 2021. Let's just start off with some questions. Oh, by the way, if you have any questions, obviously feel free to drop them in the chat, or you can wait till like the Q&A portion later. But just in case you wanna let them percolate a little bit. I think let's start with a question, and let's start with Roselle first. So the question that I had was, what do you think are the challenges or the easiest things, like challenges / easiest things about writing romance books?
For me, it's I'm not good at writing the steamy. I need practice. So usually when I'm sitting there in front of the keyboard, I'm typing, and I will make myself blush and giggle, and then I'll just step away for a bit, giggling to myself, and then I'm like, okay, you got to get into, like, I'm trying to be better at that. Like for book 4, I'm trying to insert that in. So for me, it's a main challenge. That's why when I read authors like Helen Wang, I'm like, oh my God, she is so good. This is what I aspire to write, right? Because, yeah, I'm working on that. I'm currently working on that.
For me, it's hard to just keep coming up with unique premises that people haven't seen before. Because in a lot of the times people are looking for the tropes, so you kind of like may or may not naturally fall into that. But to have something that is unique and fresh and new that somebody hasn't seen and will pick up your book and go, oh, I haven't seen this, maybe I'll give it a try. That to me is not super challenging because my brain has a million ideas, but it's more like finding the right one that you want to write, and can actually carry a whole story through. So that's the biggest challenge for me. As far as what's easiest, I would say the awkward, slow burn rolling into the final first kiss to me is like something that I love doing. So it's like this intricate sort of, it has to be believable, and just pulling all those levers and just making sure that you've got all the little kind of like check boxes of like, now there's enough tension, it's believable, you have chemistry, the characterization's right, and then like bam, the first kiss. That's what I find the easiest.
As far as like what I find the easiest, I would probably say is the premise and like the first 25,000, like pretty much everything up till the end of Act 1. Like that's just so juicy and fun for me to write, because those are the scenes which probably inspired the whole book. Like I'm one of those writers who definitely see the whole beginning kind of come together, like it percolates all together, and I see it like cinematically. And the hardest part is literally the rest of the book. Like everything else is hard.
I'm the same as you, Lily. Like once I get to 25,000, it's like, oh God, it's gonna be like pulling teeth to get through the rest of it sometimes. But I think I'm the opposite of Roselle in that I can write steamy scenes anywhere. I've mentioned this in events before, so apologies if anyone is hearing this twice. But for the X Talk, I wrote some of the sex scenes, I would say most, if not all of them, on an airplane in a middle seat between two older gentlemen. And I was totally fine. But one of the challenges for me is probably getting the main characters to have chemistry, because sometimes you put two people together and they are just immediately sparking and bantering and just playing off each other, and it's so much fun. But other times you put two people in a scene and you're like, how do I get them to like show that they like each other or show that they don't think they should like each other. And it just totally depends on the characters. And sometimes you need to really work for it. But there's other times when it's just immediately there. Those are fantastic and make the working for it a lot easier.
Roselle, did you want to share what the easiest thing is? Sorry, I realized that we only got half of it.
I know it's not related to romance, but it's inserting food in places. For me, that's it.
Yeah, and you do it so well. I gave my mom, when she was going through chemo, your books, and she would like write me emails and be like, oh, do you know like when this happened at this, like on this page? And I'd be like, I read that like 2 years ago, Mom. I don't know what you're talking about anymore. The next question is, what advice would you give to authors who want to write romance books, in case we have any aspiring romance writers who are viewing this panel?
I'll go if Roselle's not. There's a lot of talk on Twitter, but I would say that having a happily ever after seems to be something that is a must do for romance. So I think just making sure that you have that resolution is whatever it is, to be happily ever after, happily for now. I think that's something just to keep in the back of your mind while you're writing. That does seem to be a big deal breaker for a lot of readers as far as kind of qualifying as romance.
Okay, I think I finally came up with one. For me, and this is for diverse writers, is like no trope is really overdone for you yet. Like, even though they're like, oh, okay, vampires are done. But what about like Chinese vampires or Japanese vampires? Like, it's not something like no trope is ever done, and feel free to explore that. And like, it's okay to do so.
Yeah, I would say read as much as possible, like in the romance genre, especially like whatever tropes are like important in your work in progress. Like read books which have those tropes, because they'll show you how to do it either well, or it'll show you areas where you think you can do better. And I think, a lot of writers, like they get their start, like their ideas where they think a what if scenario to something else, whether that's a book or a TV show or a movie or whatever. And they're like, I like that, but I think I want to do my own twist on it, and I want to make it better, or I want to make it different. And, going off of that, I would also say, like, don't freak out if another book gets announced, or you see like a publisher's weekly announcement for something that sounds like your book. Because like, as Roselle said, there are so many like different ways to use the same elements and to do it diversely and do it differently. So don't count yourself out just because something sounds like something you might be working on, because I guarantee you a pitch or the announcement language is very different from what the actual book is going to turn out to be.
All of that is such good advice. One thing I would add is writing or trying to outline based on romance or romantic comedy beats, because you can find just a ton of beat sheets out there for variety of genres. And it wasn't until I found a specific romantic comedy beat that really helped me plot out my stories. And now I always start with that. It has sort of like the disastrous meet cute, or maybe not so disastrous. In my books, it tends to be disastrous. And, you have the like, he's not that bad moment, which is one of my favorites, and just really like takes you through the kind of genre conventions. So I think that's a really great jumping off point. And that's not to say that every book needs to follow a specific beat sheet, or every book needs to have like a third act breakup, for example. But I think once you kind of have that as a foundation, it makes it easier for you to bend those rules. And I put that in quotes because I really don't think there is anything you absolutely need to do, except for happily ever after, happy for now, when you're writing romance. But those beats can really help you like shape your story. And even just Googling like romantic comedy beats, I have something bookmarked on my computer, but I probably Google it like every few months when I'm starting a new project. Actually, I'll try to find that link right now and I'll put it in the chat.
Oh, perfect. I was going to ask also if you had like a specific link for it. I love the our chats right now is like making me think of. I love the idea of like knowing kind of what people expect and what is sort of, yeah, as you saw say, like the beats, and then also knowing, okay, but this is like a good time to not do that, right? For example, the third act breakup, right? Like this is a time when you hold back and you don't do that. I think that's really a smart idea to know what the sort of tropes and conventions are so that you know when to cleverly kind of like subvert them, I guess. I had a question also because I don't know, a lot of people, I know that authors don't always stay in adult romance. They're branching out into other age groups or other genres or, other projects, period. So I wanted to know, for authors with other genres or age groups of books, or, even if it's your work in progress right now, how is it to approach /sell/write that book in comparison to the romance book? So basically, like, how, when you're working on other projects or other, genres or age groups, how is that different than working on your romance books for the writing process or, feelings, I guess?
For me, I'm working on a YA fantasy right now, and I've been writing adult all this time, and I had to remember what it was like. I read YA, but for me, channeling my inner teen and how it's all about like basically feelings, that you're just your emotions with very little skin, basically, right? Because the skin is something that you learn over time to develop. And having switched over to a different category and a different genre, it was extremely difficult. And I'm still revising it, and for me, it's extremely difficult because I thought I had to start all the way from the beginning and find a different voice. But I realized that I write the way that I normally write with my own voice, but inject all of those other elements that are not there, like more emotion, more of the other stuff. And it's been definitely a learning experience, and I couldn't have done it without my CP. Suzanne's one of them. And like my agent, who's like just kind of guiding me through this as I'm trying to write for a different category and a genre.
I write both YA and adult, which I think we have a few people who do that. And I just finished up we're going into line edits for a YA holiday rom-com coming out next year. And it takes place in a mall, and it's about a mall, just a rivalry. And so that one was interesting because they're a little bit younger than the other characters I've written, on the younger side. So I think they're, juniors in high school, and they're each other's sort of first, everything. I mean, even though they don't necessarily say that out loud, and just the idea of experiencing things for the first time and what those feelings might be like, and those interactions. There's a lot of awkwardness, but it's also like people just sorting through their feelings and trying to get through it. And it's not, there's no roadmap for how to go through that as a teenager. So that's been interesting because, it also, at the same time, I'm drafting my adult rom-com / sort of like a blend of women's fiction and romance. And that one is about a woman who applies for a job and then finds out during the background check process that she didn't actually graduate from college and has to go back to college to get her college to like finish off her credits. And so I have her in college as a 32-year-old. And so it's like totally opposite of that last book that I just am line editing, where she is much older than everybody else and has this like paranoia about like, I can't believe where I am in my life right now. And it's kind of funny to kind of go back to that. And So I just have been just finding ways to make sure that the voice and the characterization and the emotions are true to that age group, but also just the circumstances also definitely affect how they perceive how their life is going.
Yeah, I also write across age groups and across genres, and it is my dream to one day publish like in every genre and age group that I want to. For right now, though, I'm published in YA and adult romance, and the one thing that I would say that both those things do really, really well is like the interiority of the main character. I would say I haven't seen any category other than YA do it like with the voice and the interiority and making those small stakes seem huge, because it's not fantasy, it's not like an espionage kind of thriller. Like there are small stakes, and I really love how YA makes that believability seem so huge to the character in that moment. And I would also say that romance like has fantastic interiority. Like I can't think of a lot of books in other genres that really make you like step into that character's shoes and like scream at the book as hard, like just kiss already. And interestingly, before I started publishing anyway, I was writing mostly like thrillers and fantasy. And what I took from that is world building. Like I love world building, and I think it's kind of like a given whenever you pick up like a Lillie Vale book, you're gonna get a lot of like the city, the town, or like, whether it's like a huge like ecosystem like a town or a city, or something smaller like a house or a coffee shop or what have you. Like I always like bring in that coziness of the world building, which I think I learned primarily from my past at writing fantasy. And I think, honestly, from any genre, from any age group, you can learn something and you can take it and apply it to anything else you write. Like you're just kind of adding to your own skill set, basically, like no matter what you do.
I love that. And yeah, like Suzanne and Lillie, I also do YA and adult. And I started out doing YA. So going to adult after that was definitely really freeing in a lot of ways. I think probably the first thing that people ask about is like, oh, okay, so just like, you can throw the door wide open during the steamy scenes. And like, yes, you definitely can. But there's also just a lot more freedom when it comes to what your character can do when they don't have, parents to answer to, and maybe they don't have as many financial limitations, or they don't have to go to school. And the kind of shift that's been happening for me lately has been dabbling in kind of contemporary adjacent plots. So I have a book coming out next year that is a time loop story. It's about a girl forced to relive her first day of college alongside the guy who humiliated her in one of her classes. And so that required a lot of world building that I had not done before at all. There's definitely a lot of world building that goes into contemporary, just like Lillie said, with when it comes to creating a city, a house, whatever your character's surroundings are. But for that book, I had to figure out, I didn't have to like actually figure out the physics of time travel, because that is definitely beyond me. But I had to figure out rules for this particular world, and I had to come up with a resolution that makes sense for the book, even if it might be a stretch scientifically. And I just gonna put it out there now that I don't think any physicists should read this book, because they will probably just be really upset. And then I also recently pitched kind of a genre bending adult romance that I don't know what's going to happen with that yet. But yeah, I am really drawn to kind of pushing the boundaries of reality. I think I am just dipping the tiniest pinky toe into into speculative, and it's just been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I love what we were talking about world building, and it makes me think of a question that just came to me, actually, because what I love about all of your books is that even though it's contemporary, so it's probably the most, akin to what we live on in our lives, how wonderfully and detailed. All of you actually like bring in like a specific setting, like a neighborhood, a city, a street, like the I love what you were saying, Lily, like the ecosystem, or I'm pretty sure, yeah, about the character's world. It's in a contemporary world, but we all have our own like world within that. I wanted to, yeah, continue what Lily and Rachel were talking about, and talk about how you balance that, especially since it's not like, I don't know what it's called. Is it called the second worlds? It's not the worlds that are not our world, whatever that's called. So yeah, how you balance creating those touches to bring it like closer to the character's world, I guess. I don't know who wants to start because that was totally impromptu. So
for me, I use a lot of like fabulism and elements of magical realism like into my settings. That I also want to make sure that the setting itself is somewhat of a character, like an unseen, like an unstated character. Like for Natalie Tan, it was Chinatown and San Francisco. For Vanessa, it was the city of Paris. And for the upcoming book for Sophie, it's Toronto. It's like a love letter to like each of these places. But yeah, like I want to make sure that all of these details are there with a reason, like for a purpose. I think of writing almost like this is all pertaining to setting. In my case, that's what I'm going to use as an example. Like for when I'm writing about setting, I think about it in filmmaking, set design. In that when you're going into your main character's apartment, what do you see there? Why is it there? What is its purpose? Like people have, is it messy? Is it clean? There's a reason why it is the way that it is. And I think that those are all of those immersive details that help your readers feel like they are in that story, that they're going through those same experiences.
I like to do fish out of water stories. And that actually is a fish out of water for me because I'm usually having to do a lot of research for each and every book. And so my YA debut, half of it was outside in the wilderness, and it was in a survivalist situation, and both characters were definitely out of their element. My adult debut last year was set in a gaming company, and I had to do a ton of research to make sure those details were accurate and believable as well. Not just the physical environment, but also the hostility and the tension in the work environment as a woman. And then this year's debut, this year's sophomore releases, Sunny Song took place on a farm, which I also had to do research. And then probably the closest to my own world was So We Meet Again, that one. And that just is because it took place in Tennessee where I grew up. And so a lot of that part was actually easy to write just because it was so familiar to me. And it just, I knew what I wanted to highlight in the story. Rosie talks about kind of following kind of almost a cinematography and cinematic approach. And I would agree that that's sort of how I look at the stories too. Like, what do I see? What are the senses that come to mind when I am starting a particular scene or a chapter? And when you do screenwriting, because I took a few writing classes, all types of writing classes, and at least the ones that were for TV, it just says like interior room, and then you just jump into dialogue, and it has no real world building whatsoever. That's like up to the director. And so I had to actually figure out how to do all the world building, because that's like how I was trained. I was like, oh, this is not very helpful for novel writing. So that's one of the big differences that I saw in those types of different fields, is like, it's, there's just certain givens that they do in TV and film that are just one line, whereas in a novel, it would take like maybe half of a page to 5 pages to figure out, like, to actually establish where they are.
Yeah, I try to think of what elements I would find particularly magical, like what speaks to my soul when I try to make the balance between, you know, how much world building is enough, how much is too much. And I mean, I can pull like a Hobbit and describe a house or a hill or a coffee shop for like 3 pages if someone will let me. And very thankfully, none of my editors have. And I've also gotten, you know, a lot better about self-editing myself and thinking, do I want to write about this because the words are really pretty, or does the reader actually need to know it? And, you know, like Roselle said, like you have to think about the intentionality behind pretty much everything you include in your book. Like the page space, the word count, like it's all precious real estate. And you don't want to waste a reader's time or make them skip over, you know, half a page if it's boring or uninteresting, or if it doesn't tell you something about the character and their worldview. So what I usually do at the start of every book, and I kind of keep this running list going as I write and as I revise, is I kind of have this list of what Suze Denard calls like magic cookies, which I found like really, really interesting because she talks about all the things that you want to include in your book, which are special to you, that make you excited to write each and every single scene. And I try to include like some of these in pretty much every chapter, like what's important to me. And, you know, I live in the Midwest in a pretty like landlocked area. So for me, a magic cookie in pretty much all my books so far has been like a town by the coast, the beach, a lake, a river. In my YA debut from 2019, Small Town Hearts, it was a coastal Maine village, which I desperately wanted to write this like craggy little Maine village. In The Shoddy Setup, which came out last month, which was my adult debut, it was a fictional island which you could only get to by ferry. And I just found that really compelling and interesting for me personally. And for my next book, my next YA book, Beauty and the Bayshram, coming out next this summer, in that one, there is a river, which is kind of based on a river in my hometown. Only, of course, I made it sound like a bit more magical and adding like that little veneer of like you want to make it believable, but at the same time, you want to add that thing that a reader is going to feel is magical without actually being magic. And I think, you know, that is a really fine balance to get. But as long as you're intentional about everything you're including in your book and you can basically defend why it's there and why it's important or why you love it and why a reader could love it, I think like you're already like on your way to finding that balance.
That's so well said. I really need to look up and bookmark that magic cookies tidbit because that's such a great idea. So for me, all of my books have taken place in Seattle, and the simple reason for that is, and up until 6 months ago, it was the only place I had ever lived, and I hadn't spent significant time elsewhere. And Seattle, just something about it feels like hugely romantic to me. You know, maybe it's the weather. I mean, this is like my dream, like Pacific Northwest cover right here. But I also just love, I think there are so many quirks and idiosyncrasies to the city. And I think it's really fun to have characters who have like a relationship with the city where they're kind of making fun of it, but they still really love it. I think Seattle is definitely a character in all of my books, and my characters have a different relationship with it. But then when it comes to world building on like a more micro level, Emily Henry had this piece of advice where you pick one corner of the room and you describe just what's in that one corner. And I think about that a lot because I think it's really helpful because you don't have to think of just describing the whole scene. Like there are 4 tables and 12 chairs and, you know, 2 vases. Like, no, like that doesn't matter. The things that really matter are like, there's 1 vase of flowers, but it's broken because someone dropped it for some specific reason. Like each detail needs to have a reason for being there.
Yeah, I love this idea that you're all talking about with intentionality, because it obviously makes so much sense in a way that like it makes so much sense, but I never really thought about how much sense it made until today. So we talked already about conventions in romance books. So I wanted to ask you, because this is something that I was thinking about. Since there's like the pretty, I feel like well-established idea that when romance books, they end with like happily ever after, or like, as you were saying, Rachel, like happily, what was it? Happy for now? Happily for now. Does this change how you approach like the overall plot, not plot function, but like plot architecture, right? You know, since a lot of books that don't have that ending, you know, could end, I guess, with a non-happily ever after, I suppose. So I wanted to know if it changes, how you approach like the plot or the characters or the tension. Like, does it change your writing process in any way?
For me, it's always, I need to have that. Like right now, the types of books that I'm writing, I want that comfort. Like as a reader, I need to have my HEA. I mean, it's just like that's what I plan for. Yes, you put them through hell. Yes, there are times where they feel like they're dying and they don't want to do this anymore, and it looks like that. But it's that comfort, because it's what I love so much about romance, knowing that I know I'm not going to be wrecked by the end of it, right? And even though I write like women's fiction or general fiction, I approach it with a romance like state of mind where I want to have my happy ending, dang it. And I need that going in when I pick up a book. So everything that I'm writing so far, I put that in because that's what I need. Now it could change in the future where I could go into like an emo state and go, no, people can't be happy. I'm not happy. No one's happy. That's just the way it's going to be for the next few books. But right now, I need the happy.
Yeah, I need happy too. Who doesn't right now? Because I have, in my mind, such high stakes for the fish out of water stories, I definitely am kind of barreling toward that happily ever after moment, even if it's not like what people imagined perfectly happening. Like it could end up just being a kiss or together, or a career resolution in addition to a romantic resolution. But I definitely, because these are usually an awkward main character who is completely out of her element, with the slow burn romance accompanying that, I definitely aim to have sort of a personal resolution as well as her romantic thing sorted out. So in a positive way. So when I'm thinking like that, when I am putting the character through, as Roselle said, like living hell, like I want to make sure that at the end, the reader kind of is like, okay, it all worked out in the end.
Yeah, and I think, like no matter what kind of conclusion or resolution you're aiming for, regardless of genre, but I know Lily's question was specifically for romance, but I'm going to go ahead and answer this kind of across the board because I think it applies for everything. It's that if you don't know how like the book is going to end, and in romance it would be, with a happily ever after or the happy for now. If you don't know how it's going to end, like I don't know how you would easily get there. It's like that quote from Alice in Wonderland. I think the Cheshire Cat says it. It's like if you don't know where you're going to go, like any road could take you there. And I think that's very true when it comes to like writing in general, no matter what genre it is, because the character who they are at the end, whether that's their romantic arc or their personal arc, you have to know who they are going to be at the end to show like the growth that they make along their way from the beginning. It's like that, like not to get all mathy, but it's like the equation, like the character at the end minus the character at the beginning equals character growth. And I think, knowing that significant other elves, you really have to like work backwards from there to figure out what obstacles you're going to put in their path to help them get there. Like what they need to overcome specifically to them that's actually going to get them to the point that you want them to get to. And for me, I find it really helpful to like know exactly who they are at the beginning and at the end, because I just find it like very like linear to do it that way, because I'm not the kind of person who can like meander and, you know, overwrite by like 200,000 words and then go back and like redo it like 10 times in order to get it the way I need it to be in my head. So I just feel like having that path like, that you know that you're going to travel down is really helpful.
Sorry. Yeah, all of that is really great. For me, I think of the happily ever after or happy for now. Like, yes, that's what's going to happen at the end. And you kind of, you know, when you're picking up a book that you have that comfort, but it's really all about the journey. Like you're reading romance because of the journey. And if the ending is already kind of established in that sense, you know, obviously there's still going to be some things that are the character is going to have to figure out along the way. But that just makes me want to make the rest of it like as unpredictable as possible. Like not to the point where, you know, they go on air to report the weather and there's like a dragon. But, you know, I just want to kind of play with reader expectations as much as I can along the way. Because I think then it just makes for a more exciting read. And it also just makes the happily ever after feel more earned because you've had to go through all these twists and turns to get there. And I really love what Lillie was saying about the equation. Because I do think that so much about reading romance is you're not reading it because you don't know what's going to happen at the end. You're reading it because you want to see those characters grow and evolve, like not just as you know, individual people, which they're absolutely doing, but as a couple, because they think that so, you know, like the real strength of romance and like a romance that does a really good job is one where like the characters have to confront something together and get through it. So it's, you know, kind of these three different threads of growth, like the main characters and then the relationship.
Yeah, I love everything that everyone just said. I love everything everyone's written and everyone just said. We have a few questions which I've been eyeing like as they've been coming in, and I really want to know. So for anyone else, just feel free to drop questions. I'm going to drop the giveaway link as well as soon as I figure out how to put the questions on the screen. But the first question is, what is your favorite romance trope and did it appear in any of your books? So, hold on. Yeah, there we go.
I could start, I guess. So mine is definitely enemies to lovers, and I probably put it in too many of my books to the point where for Weather Girl, my book that's coming out in January, the original draft of it, my editor was like, oh, could we like tone down the enemies to lovers so it's, you know, not too similar to the X Talk, because I have the X Talk, Today, Tonight, Tomorrow, my YA that came out last year, and then my YA that's going to come out next year, the Time Loop one. Those are all enemies to lovers. But I also really love combining enemies to lovers with something that just like cranks up the tension even more. So usually that's like forced proximity or only one bed. I love all of that. Love putting it all in a pressure cooker and then seeing what happens.
For me, it's one of my favorites is the Grumpy and Sunshine trope, which you will see in the third in Sophie. Like I had a little bit of that in Nat Tan, where you have Natalie basically forming a good relationship with one of the antagonists in the book, Old Woo. Like you think that he didn't, but it's kind of those things like where you don't think that they would get along and then they eventually do. So that's one of my favorite ones.
I love Grumpy Sunshine too. I also love Second Chance Romance and Enemies to Lovers as well. So I see a lot more of the hate to love type of storyline in my stories, but my next book, adult book, will have the Second Chance Romance in it. it's been interesting to figure out how to do that because it's brand new to me, but it'll happen in there.
As far as tropes that I've worked with already, in the shoddy setup, I have exes to lovers, I have second chance romance, and unfortunately, I totally had a missed opportunity for only one bed, but everyone will be happy to know it's going to be there in my next adult, the decoy girlfriend. I feel like that's like everyone's like go-to trope that like everyone other than me has done before, and it really bothered me that I haven't, because I do actually find it, you know, a cute trope. So I found a way to kind of finagle that in with my next book. My next YA is a rivals to lovers, which is kind of adjacent to enemies to lovers. And I just really enjoy like rivals to lovers in general, or exes to lovers, or anywhere where there is a history between the main characters. I've never done a friends to lovers before, so maybe that's like a future trope for me. But I really love like the banter and the history and like all like those unresolved feelings that are there when two characters have known each other for a long time, and maybe they come into the relationship or whatever the meet cute is in the book with these preconceived notions of who the other person is, and then at some point along the narrative they have that moment where it's like, I see you, like for the first time, like they see the character, the other person for who they really are. And I think like that's one of my favorite things about like my favorite, I don't know if it's a trope exactly, but I love that I see you moment. And I've actually like been very on the nose in like my recent books where it actually is a piece of dialogue, because it's like, that's the moment where it kind of crystallizes for the main character. And in Beauty and the Bayshroom, which is my next YA, it is a Grumpy and Sunshine, which is something I've wanted to do for a long, long time. And with the decoy girlfriend, it is fake dating, which is another trope that I've wanted to do for a long, long time. And I can't believe it's taken me this long to get around to doing it, because it is the most fun and I'm not done with the trope yet.
So many of my favorite tropes all in one conversation. Another audience question we had, which was really fascinating to me, is of all of your recent reads, were there any books that were outside of your preferred genre or out of your comfort zone that you would recommend to readers? This is a hard one. Wait, I think you're muted.
It's me. Sorry. I know exactly how Rachel feels now. For me, it's nonfiction, and it's kind of like a craft book that I would recommend, because I'm now, as I said, I mentioned I'm writing like YA fantasy, right? So I'm switching over categories, and one of my agent's notes has always been like, put more emotion in it, put more feeling in it, and I didn't really have that much of a problem doing that with my adult book. For some reason, I'm having issues with that with my YA. And one of the books that I picked up is called The Emotion Thesaurus. I don't know if any of you have come across that, and I highly recommend that to anybody who is like me, who's trying to still get that emotion. It's the physicality of it as well into the pages, and yeah, nonfiction.
Sorry, go ahead.
I've been doing a lot of nonfiction books on audiobook. And so I think the most recent reads, one that influenced sort of the revisions of Sunny Song, was Atomic Habits, where it really helps you figure out how to streamline your work-life balance, basically, so you can get more done. And I was like, oh, that's just good as a writer in general. And then for the current book that I'm writing, I was like, oh, I'll just kind of continue this nonfiction binge. And How Women Rise is the book that I'm reading now. And that one talks a lot about like, once women hit middle management, like how do you make sure that you're being valued for what you contribute? How do you keep moving up? And that is related to this book that I am drafting now about the person who finds out through her job search that she didn't finish college, has to go back to college, but and then has to come back to the real world and face sort of like the repercussions of what has happened. And so she's basically pulled off a career track because of this. So I found that really useful and helpful. And then I like to read things outside of romance, contemporary women's fiction, while I'm drafting. So the last book I read was Don't Look for Me. It's a really a really great thriller, and I didn't expect some of the things that happened in the book, and so I would say that that's one I would recommend.
I wouldn't say that any book I read recently has taken me by surprise, mostly because I think that I've developed a pretty good taste for the books I like. So I pretty much am guaranteed that I love anything I read now. And I'm pretty genre agnostic, so I don't really stick to like any one genre in particular. But something I haven't read like a ton of was paranormal rom-com or paranormal romance. And I got really into, because here's a spooky season plug because it's Halloween. I was really enjoying Payback's a Witch and The Ex-Hex, which came out recently. And they are so fun, so witchy, so cute. And especially in Payback's a Witch, like the town and the world building there is like chef's kiss. It's up my alley completely. I love it. And it may or may not have inspired me to want to try my hand at my own.
Yeah, I really try to read as widely as I can too. Used to be when I was drafting. Now sometimes it's when I'm revising, just because it's so easy to feel like to have things get muddled, and sometimes I just need something totally different. But what I read recently that I really loved was Finley Donovan is Killing It by Elle Cosumano. And it is a mystery about a suspense author who is overheard at a Panera talking to her editor about her next book, and she is mistaken for a contract killer and drawn into this web of, murder, conspiracy, the mob, and it was so much fun. I just had an absolute blast, and I think there are at least like 2 or 3 more books in the series coming, and honestly, I could read 100 of them. So highly, highly recommend that one.
Oh my God, I love that. Wow. Based on my conversations that people could overhear, I could also see some things being miscommunicated. Another question I also really love, oh wait, hold on, I'll put it on the screen, is that some authors mention that one of the best parts of writing a book is leaving a piece of yourself in a character. Who among the characters you wrote is your favorite / feels the closest?
For me, for Natalie, it was Miranda. Because I've always been fairly transparent about my mental health and that I suffer from anxiety and depression. And I wanted to write about a mother who has mental health issues but is a good mother. Like you can be both. That it doesn't have to be villainized, doesn't have to be stigmatized. For Vanessa, my favorite character was Evelyn. Just because she is everything I want to grow up to be. Like just somebody who is so self-possessed and is able to change even after after making mistakes and making decisions, that she's able to change. And for Sophie, my favorite character to write, I can't really spoil it, but it's one of the old ducks, and if you ever read the book, I'd love to hear what readers think who my favorite old duck is. That's the only thing that I'm going to drop for there.
I would say probably Loathe at First Sight had a character, Melody Jew, the main character, who was put through a lot because she was in a work environment that was hostile, but also just very male dominated. And she was definitely not used to working in that kind of environment. And I had experienced that myself working in tech for so long. And so I think her sort of, a lot of the thoughts in the interior kind of, I guess, the thought process as she's going through and trying to get some things at work accomplished really kind of were almost mirrored a lot of the things that I went through. So some of my it's almost like therapy where she's in these meetings and I literally went through the same things in these meetings and the work environment. Like there's, funny things about office and work culture that I put in there that I think were definitely places I'd worked in that I brought in. The closest to me personally, though, was definitely the most recent book, Jessie Kim, because she goes back to Tennessee. That's my hometown. All the kind of the, hijinks and all the fun stuff that happens with her family and within her community. She experiences like what it's like to have to go back to Korean church as an older person and then gets all the questions about like, what are you doing with your life? Are you married yet? Just all that was just, I was like, oh, that's a little too close to home maybe. But I had a lot of fun writing that one. And I felt like that one, I had a lot about my upbringing and my, just growing up as a Korean Tennessean.
I think that's a really good, but also really hard question because I feel like every book I write, I leave a little part of myself behind of who I am in that moment of writing that book. And, by the time the book comes out, it's, probably a year or maybe 2 years later, and you're a different person during that time. And you've probably written something else that you've put yourself into, like in the ensuing year or two. So it kind of feels like with every book you write, it's kind of like a time capsule to the person you were when you wrote it. And I feel like in a way, it's like any of my characters, whether it's a main character or a side character, like I feel like they do carry a little piece of me in that way. And by the time, the book is out and I'm on to my next book, I'm a different person. And it's really hard to say like who I feel like the most, because at some point I was all of them. And like in my most recent release, the person I felt like the most was this guy right here, because he is grumpy, he is cranky, and he does not like to be taken for walks. He insists on being carried by his human. And I feel like if this was me in dog form, like 100%, I would be the grumpy bulldog. And in my next two books, I'm not going to like spoil anything because arcs aren't even out yet. But I feel like in those two books, The Decoy Girlfriend and Beauty and the Vacherum, I feel like they're a time capsule in a different way. I feel like they are a part of me that are maybe more vulnerable than my books have been in the past, which is, kind of scary. But I'm looking forward to seeing how readers receive that.
Yeah, I mean, who among us has not felt like the grumpy bulldog? I absolutely leave a piece of myself with each of my characters, similar to what Lillie said, but I think it's also little pieces of who I was like as a teenager, especially, well, definitely in my YA, because I think that those books really helped me work through things that I was dealing with as a teenager that like I didn't have the toolbox to handle at that point. So it's not, I don't know if it's like a full rewriting of history, but it's like, okay, this is the kind of person that I was then. This is maybe what I would do differently in a similar situation. But I do think that the main character of Weather Girl, Ari, is very similar to me. She also is dealing with depression. She is on medication and in therapy, and there are some family struggles, conflicts that are pretty similar to mine. So I think this is probably the most personal book that I've written. There are also some pieces of the relationship that were drawn from my own. So it makes it really scary to put it out there for it to be judged. Because sometimes I think like, yeah, each book has such a huge piece of me, but you still need to like keep some things for yourself. And, it's not like anyone reading it is going to know like, oh yes, absolutely. That thing on page 117 is 100% you. But it's scary. But I almost think it's like, I don't know. It's a way of processing trauma, I think, to like kind of hide these things in our books and like let our characters deal with it in a way that we either weren't able to or never allowed ourselves to. Or, really wish that we could.
Yeah, I really love all of the answers. And what you were saying, Lillie, about how it's not even necessarily, you know, a broad piece of yourself that you leave, but like you at a moment, a snapshot basically of like what it was like for you at that moment, which may not be the same for, or probably isn't the same for you like before and after. I want to squeeze one more question in, mostly because I really want to know the answer. And I really want to know, it'll be the last one, and hopefully like more like rapid fire, because I want to know what are, or who are some of your romance book inspirations. And I think it will give people some good buying inspiration, perhaps.
For me, I've mentioned Helen. The other book that I think everybody should check out is called The Love Con, and it is by Sarcia Glass, and it's about a Black cosplayer. And it is so fun. If you miss conventions because this panini has destroyed social gatherings for you, I completely I want you to just pick this book up. And if you love cosplay, it's about a reality competition, and you got the fake boyfriend trope in it, and it's coming out, I think, next week or the week after. But it's called The Love Con. Again, highly recommend that one, and I blurbed it. Really, really loved it.
I love Helen too. I really admire authors that can kind of be seen as romance, but also have women's fiction elements in their stories. So top of mind are Sonali Dev, Alexa Martin. Actually, she just wrote a full women's fiction and book. Christina Lauren's latest, I feel like, has a nice blend, as well as Emily Henry. But yeah, those are sort of the ones that have that straddling line of women's fiction, contemporary women's fiction elements of a journey, but also has this love story, the romance as a strong part of the story as well.
Yeah, I would echo everyone that Suzanne and Roselle have already mentioned. I especially love Emily Henry, especially, for the interiority and thing that I mentioned earlier. I also really love Carrie Winfrey, who is amazing, and I will read anything she writes. I just read Very Sincerely Yours, which was amazing, and I absolutely loved it, and it has the cutest cover ever. I also really like Alexis Daria with You Have Me at Ola, and I think she just had another book come out, the Adios. So I forget the title. I haven't read it yet, but I'm really looking forward to that one.
I think it's a lot like Adios.
Yeah, a lot like Adios. The titles are so catchy, which makes me feel even worse. I forgot that one. But yeah, I really love, the new trend of like these witchy paranormal rom-coms. And I also really love what was that? Oh, it just came out. Alison Cochran's The Charm Offensive. That is the most like tender, soft, sweet, and swoony book I have read pretty much in the last couple of months. So I would definitely recommend checking that one out as well. And of course, anyone on this panel, like Suzanne, Rachel, and Roselle, like their books are amazing, and you should definitely check them out too.
Thank you. I 100% co-sign that. And I also just need to quickly say that if anyone has seen me yawning, it's like my greatest fear is like being caught yawning, but I didn't know until yesterday that daylight savings in Europe started today instead of next week. So that's the only reason my clock is all off. But in terms of inspirations, I grew up obsessed with Meg Cabot, and she has just always been like at the very top for me. Like I read all of her YA and adult books, and like I really wanted to do exactly what she was doing. But I just didn't, it felt so out of reach. So the fact that like I'm able to write both YA and adult now, like obviously nowhere near what Meg Cabot is doing, but that is, I think my younger self would be definitely pinching herself. But the other person, just recent author who's a huge inspiration is Sarah Hogel. Her books are so sharp and funny, and I really don't think anyone has a voice quite like hers. Her sense of humor is just so excellent, and I like have to highlight every sentence in her books. They're just really fantastic.
Okay, I just wanted to, I had to Google how to spell Sarah Hogel's name because I was like, is this Hogel? What? Thank you everyone for these questions, this conversation. It has made my Halloween so special since I wasn't going to do anything else today on Halloween. Just a reminder that in the description below, there are bookshop links for everyone's books, but like, I think it should be pretty easy for you to find it wherever you are. And the giveaway link I will drop back in the chat. I know that it's been a while since I posted it, so you'd have to scroll up a lot, but here it is for everyone else. And overall, I just want to say thank you so much for everyone joining me and taking the time out of your perhaps busier Halloween plans than mine. And yeah, just obviously check out everyone's books and all the recs because I've seen a lot of them around and I've read a lot of them and they are all fabulous. So I hope everyone has a really great evening, morning, afternoon, tomorrow, yesterday, and see you all in the next panel.
Bye. Thank you guys so much.
Bye. Thanks for watching.
Guys.